Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this morning's FIREX webinar. I hope everyone is keeping safe and well at this time, and I'm James Moore, editor of IFSEC Global, and I'll be your host today. This is part of our FIREX Digital Week program taking place this week, and is the first of two webinars today. We've had some fantastic sessions already this week, including sessions from our safety and health team taking place on Monday, covering the future of health and safety and PPE, and a host of security-related content taking place on Tuesday and yesterday. If you missed them, not to worry, all this week's sessions will soon be available on demand for you to listen to at your leisure. So keep an eye out on social media and by signing up to the IFSEC Global and SHP online newsletters for their release. You can also follow all the latest by searching the hashtag FIREXDigital on social media. And also, a big thank you to Baldwin Boxall, our sponsors for today. So, on to this morning's session. Here, we'll be discussing how the coronavirus has affected the fire safety sector, with the top fire safety associations in the UK all represented here. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and you can see the agenda here. We have four presenters today who I'll shortly hand over to. We are just waiting on Jonathan O'Neill, but hopefully he'll arrive. And we'll then move on to a panel debate session afterwards. Just a few housekeeping announcements to make, and we'll then get going. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. We do have a few key topics that the panelists will be covering during the session already, but please do feel free to send in questions as well near the end. If there is a specific... Sorry, I think Jonathan might have joined, which is why the presentation is going awry slightly. So back to the speakers. We do have a few key topics that the panelists will be covering during the session already, but please do feel free to send in questions as well near the end. If there is a specific speaker you are aiming a question at, please do highlight it in the question. If we can't answer all the questions live, we'll put them to the speakers after this webinar and put together an article on IFSEC Global in the weeks following. So be sure to keep a lookout for that. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and for the best experience, it is advised to use the Google Chrome browser when viewing this webinar. Near the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey, found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Finally, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or simply type your issue into the Q&A area and we'll look to offer our assistance. Now, on to the presentation. The speakers on your screen, who I'm sure many will recognise, will be discussing today's topic, with each covering how their associations have supported fire safety professionals during the COVID crisis, and their thoughts on the impact on the sector. As I mentioned, you can view the full speaker bios from your dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen, but I'll just do a quick introduction for each. Dennis Davis is currently Executive Officer for the Fire Sector Federation and an International Independent Advisor on fire and civil protection matters. Within the Federation, Dennis's technical roles involve leading competency work, fire research and statistics, and international affairs. Ian Moore is the CEO of the Fire Industry Association in the UK, having joined in September 2015. Prior to this, Ian was the Managing Director of several companies operating in the fire and security industry, the most recent being Elmdean International and as Vice President of Potter Signal. Niall Rowan took on the role of Chief Executive Officer at the ASFP at the start of 2017, having been the association's technical officer since 2010. As CEO, he provides leadership and direction to the ASFP's aims to protect life, property, and the environment through educating all those involved in the design, development, specification, installation and maintenance of built-in fire protection. And Jonathan O'Neill, if he can join us, began his professional life in the insurance industry and in June 1999 was appointed Managing Director of the FBA. Jonathan has served on numerous government, ministerial and sector advisory bodies and was part of the Strategic Advisory Group on the Fire Futures Review. In 2017, Jonathan was awarded an OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours for services to fire safety. We'll begin first, however, with a presentation from Dennis Davis from the Fire Sector Federation. Dennis, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and it's good that we can meet even though we can't meet. I intend to move forward looking at how the Federation has actually tried to assist people. And to do that, of course, I need to explain very briefly what the Federation is about, and then maybe take this forward, as I say, to see how we've been coping with what's going on. The Federation itself is an organisation of organisations, I suppose, is the best way of explaining it. And two of our members are actually already present in the form of FIA and ASFP. And that, I think, illustrates the sort of breadth of this organisation, which has about 50 members. It's a not-for-profit, it's a non-trade organisation, and the slides are going absolutely bonkers at the moment for some reason. Let me try and get back to where we should be. I don't know whether you're seeing this, James, but they seem to have gone wild.
Yes, sorry about this. I think Jonathan's in the console. He's in the webinar. He's just trying to contact him at the moment. Just give it 1 moment. Let him see the messages on the screen, hopefully. 1 second. I will push back to your screen in a second for you, Dennis.
I love it. I love it.
It's live, guys. This is what happens, unfortunately. 1 second. Right, that's back to you, Dennis. If it goes through again, feel free to just carry on. I'm just trying to contact Jonathan at the moment.
Okay. Oh, it's off again, doing its own thing.
I'll let you carry on your presentation, and I'll try and get hold of Jonathan.
Okay. Well, if I'm just going to go back 1 slide. There you go. All I wanted to say really is there's about 50 of these organisations. It's a not-for-profit. It's not a trade organisation, and that's very important because we do not try to do what our organisations do. So when you're hearing from Ian and Niall, you're actually hearing what they are doing, and that's not what we're about. What we're about is trying to draw a consensus on behalf of the sector generally. And we think that's a particularly helpful way when you're talking to government and parties like that. Our drive over a period, and particularly for the last few years, has been a series of priorities, and they're on the screen at the moment for you. But essentially, they're about creating safe environments, whether that's in the built environment, whether we've got good people, competent people to try and help drive things forward, improving the level of understanding generally throughout the population, whether that's from school children or right through industry to the competence of workplace people. And finally, making sure that we've got good surveillance, priority systems in place, and that we ultimately protect lives and property. So our ethos is very much about fire safety in the UK and driving that agenda forward on behalf of our members. It's fair to say that there's an awful lot going on at the moment, and arising from the Queen's speech and the tragedy that was Grenfell. A great deal is now going forward, both in changes of legislation, in competency areas, in trying to drive clarity, hopefully, in our new building regime systems. So there's already a great deal of activity ongoing. And I think what's important to make the point here, none of this has gone away. And in fact, for those of us in the sector, a great deal of effort is going on still with government as they take forward the plans to introduce changes both in legislation and the way the built environment is now being controlled and developed. And in the midst of this, one has to say, of course, arrived the coronavirus. And one of the things that's really starting to influence members and an area that we've got to try and assist with is the economy. It's literally, I think, as someone said the other day, fallen off a cliff. And the graphs clearly show in stock markets what is going on. And we're hearing, as we all know, different voices telling us exactly how they expect the recovery to move forward. And from the Chancellor the other day, the voice, of course, that it wasn't necessarily going to be a sudden bounce back. And I think that's extremely important as we look forward in this overall context of the coronavirus. What comes as part of that process has been the public messaging and the decline, as we know, from the peak, effectively, of where we are and into what is now a staged recovery so far as the UK government is concerned, with the shift in emphasis to staying alert and controlling the virus. But of course, linked to that, a whole series of workplace-dominated activities. And I think that's the area that really we have been trying to sort of alert people to and help our organisations. Many of whom, of course, are doing this in a much more intense and detailed way for the benefit of their individual members. And the other speakers, I'm sure, will cover that in some detail. If I look forward at some of what we've been trying to do, we gave guidance a week or two back on what we call revival planning, which is really about trying to give some practical hints and tips about how we're going to take this whole process forward. These are drawn from industry in general, not just the fire sector, but I think form a useful tip list, a checklist for people to follow through as ideas about their own organisation, and therefore represent a collation of some of the views. And they're broken into three large chunks: the workforce management and then areas of success. And I just want to touch on these as we run through some of the points. I'm not going to cover all of these because they're lists, and if you're interested in them, they are freely available on our website, so you can go and read them in detail. The first part we emphasise is that the workforce itself needs confidence if it's going to return to work. And a chunk of that, and I think it's worth emphasising, the first few points, really relate to relationships within the workplace with statutory people, such as the health and safety representative. Health and safety at work has these people, and it's worth ensuring that they obviously are up to speed, agree with what you're trying to do and where things are all going. Then I think there's a whole chunk of practical things about PPE and how you get them and what you do and how you establish social distancing within the workplace. Because effectively what we're trying to do is distance and isolate and contain any possibilities of risk within the workplace. And those do require practical answers like barrier screens and cleaning practices and issues such as hot desking and things that we wouldn't necessarily think about, like the photocopiers and all that sort of stuff. So a whole series of practical stuff really related to the workplace itself. And that goes on, I think, into how we actually control the processes that are done, manage people within certain areas. And there are some very good technological answers coming up to some of this. You know, wearing wristbands is a simple one, but I've seen technology where people can have a 2-meter distance device that they pop on their bum pad or they pop in their pocket. And if somebody comes within their distance, they get a physical noise. So they get a vibration and a noise that gives them warning. So there are practical ways of being able to work normally, but still be alert that things might happen. And then, of course, there's the big issue when the people actually mix the social interaction, particularly at break times. So a lot of premises are shutting down their restaurants and so on, but telling people to bring their own food in. But at the same time, this is the very moment when you relax your guard, you're not doing the job, you've wandered off for your break, and you're going to find yourself in that sort of situation. And then finally, the tips really relate to the issues that go around the technology and all the things that can be done around the workplace to help in that regard. So the workforce, I think, can really be relatively well assured that these things are happening. And I think there's one point I also wanted to draw out of this really, and that is actually the redesignation and the review of the fire safety arrangements. Because one of the big issues for companies going back to work is that because of social distancing, because of one-way routing, because of how they're using their door systems and all the rest of it, they may very well have compromised evacuation, escape routines, all that sort of thing. And there's a practical need to review those things, probably through a new fire risk assessment. And again, as a sector, we've been putting the message out there that businesses, as they go back to work after this long lockdown, should actually take time to review their own fire safety arrangements to make sure effectively they've not been compromised. We then sort of looked at the management side of where all these things are going. And a big chunk of this, I think, is when you're in a very uncertain situation, one of the things you can always do is look at the things that you do control. And the things that are under your direct control at least give you that sense of optimism that you can change things, you can alter things. But you've still got to be realistic about what might happen. And the timescales that we're now seeing are quite threatening. And again, we bring out a series of points to try and drive that forward. But underneath that are key issues about the culture, of how people are actually going to work together, and how the impact on senior management, particularly those responsible for the business, are suffering as they try to manage through what is for them an incredibly difficult time. Not only are they dealing with the things that we're all dealing with, but they're also worrying about the survival probably of their business. So that becomes a very, very important part of the process as this gradual return is planned forward, bringing furloughed staff back, 10%, 15%, just enough to get the processes going, get the gateways open so that growth can really start to grow. And it's worth remembering that as you bring furloughed staff back to work, you've got the issue that they will probably have new welfare demands. Maybe the childcare arrangements are not good enough at home. They're working through a difficult stage in their return to work, and it means the HR departments, or if it's a small company, the boss may have to spend a lot more time trying to deal with all those things. And that's while he's worrying, of course, about cash and cash flow and whether or not the schemes that exist from the Treasury, the banks and all the rest of it are going to help him. Because this, we're being told now, could be an extremely long duration. How long this impact will affect business is really undecided, and this could be an extremely deep recession period. And therefore, we've got to plan effectively, we're saying, from the bad to the very optimistic outlook of life. And that could include repurposing parts of the business and actually trying to come at it in a different way. I mean, we've seen repurposing at the moment in some manufacturing areas where they're moving on, say, to the manufacture of PPE or other things that they realise people want. The same goes on in the fire sector. We really do need to think about whether there are areas that can change and whether the process will actually withstand a long period of what effectively could be drought. But all that really follows a pattern of trying to get the cash flow right, trying to get the governance right, trying to test the existing model to see if it'll actually stand up to it, and whether or not the system, and I've said there's a lot that's still going on in fire legislation, whether the systems will actually be strong enough to withstand a drought, an extended drought, while we're in this recession period. I suppose the next step and the bright outlook is, well, what can we do about getting forward? And enabling success, as we've called it, is very much about communication. Communication internally, and communication with the wider associations and federations and partners and businesses that you work with, the customers. It's just trying to make sure that new routes are open. I mean, a lot of people have shifted onto social media, and a lot of companies do not necessarily operate social media in any business sense, or didn't. And of course, that's how a lot of activity is now going. And then another really serious part about the success is the supply chain, because you might be ready to go, but in fact, it's your supplier. There's difficulties, there's overseas, there's problems with actual bringing through customs particular items. There's a supply and demand issue. The whole procurement process could be the downfall, not just of a small company, but a really big company who's stuck just waiting for some supplies. So it really does mean that the supply chain becomes the critical part of this success process, and ensuring that we can actually do that and maintain it becomes really so important. So, having sort of produced a few tips, if you like, to try and assist, we then have to sort of look forward. And what we see with the COVID alert level process that the UK government is adapting, of course, is it's already shown us that there are national government changes. So we actually can find ourselves in the UK growing at different rates in different places for different reasons. I think the lockdown in Scotland is not coming off for another 10 days. So that is going to change how we go. And some of them have not adopted the 5 scale COVID alert level type thing, although that's the national government view. And some certainly haven't adopted the 5-tier approach, which the Prime Minister illustrated was going to be our way forward. So there are variations, and business has got to be alert to their variations. And at the moment, we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're asking the questions and not getting many answers. And the reply from this sector, and the way we're looking at it in many ways, is we've got to provide our own answers. We do not necessarily, therefore, have to wait for the rules. We have to try and interpret the rules and make it work. And I think that becomes a key component, particularly when you think that we're now moving gently into phase 2, the smarter control phase, but really without the test, the track and trace that people are talking about, without the vaccine, without the research coming through from that, moving this whole process forward could be extremely slow and very difficult. And it isn't, as I say, just us. We export. The fire sector is a good exporting sector. So it's our customers around the world. It isn't just within the UK and within the UK base. And finally, I think that brings us to the crunch of, well, how long is this going to go on? Or is this, as people now say, the new normal? You know, we have debates. We know we should wear gloves, wash our hands, wear masks, you know, protect our eyes, stay 2 meters apart, all those sorts of things. They're all being very much impressed upon us. So we know how to stop the spread. And I suppose the message really is that we've somehow got to work our way through that within our own workplace environments, with our workers very much on board, to try and ensure that we can get the country back up on its feet, and particularly our fire sector back up on its feet. And there are success stories, there's no doubt about that. I watched a short TV film the other day of some manufacturer, I think it was in the West Midlands, he's up and running. And when you actually see the innovation that's come from his own work people and their own organisation as managers, you actually see how a manufacturer can get going again and still keep those essentials listed on the screen in place so that his staff are healthy and he's healthy. So really, I'd like to pause there and pass on really to the next speaker. Thank you very much for listening. James?
Yeah, no, it's Ian speaking. Thank you, Dennis. Good morning, everybody. This is Ian Moore. As it says on the slide there, hopefully you're looking at the same one I am. It says CEO of the Fire Industry Association. Okay, I've already seen Dennis's presentation, so I'm going to be trying to avoid the same subjects. I think we're all working in the same direction. We're all aware of the same information. We read the government guidelines. We're involved with factories, with installers, maintainers on a daily basis. So we're very, very aware of all that Dennis put across there, which is really, really useful information. And we've been imparting some of the Fire Sector Federation's information to our members as well, because, as Dennis said, we're a member of the Fire Sector Federation, so our input goes into the Fire Sector Federation as well as back to our members and public. So my presentation, I'll try to keep it brief. I'm only down to sort of 7 slides to sort of tell you a little bit different about what we're doing differently from what the Fire Sector Federation have already covered, to let you know what we're thinking of and how we're trying to support people. So I've broken mine down into 4 sections, which is about the information trail. Then we'll talk about working conditions, whether that be internal and external, the financial implications, and of course the internal adaptations we as an organisation, because we are a company, although not for profit, we are a company ourselves, and we need to make sure that we're in the right position to move forward. So let's talk about information here. Where our website hits, it's not surprising everybody's has gone up, because people have more time to sit there and peruse through the internet looking at various bits of information, but we're in the region of 4 or 5 times as many hits looking for information. So clearly people are seeing information as very, very important about their lives, about their working lives anyway, about what we're doing. and we make sure that we're updating our COVID-19 pages every day with the latest information from government or from industry, what's changing. We're very prevalent on social media, as Dennis alluded to earlier. We already were, to be honest, anyway. We're quite a large organisation on the media output, but it's increased significantly because we're realising people see things in different ways. And the new normal, which Dennis has already alluded to, is a phrase we use all the time. And picking up things on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and Snapchat. I'm sure my children tell me 15 others I'm a dinosaur for not knowing, but all these different platforms where we can look for this information and keep it bang up to date. So as soon as it's released, come out of it. So that's what we're doing. We've been posting all that information. We're also still running Brexit sites, which I'll allude to in a minute, and seeking clarification on what's been said. I think if you look at all the reports coming out, and one of the biggest frustrations of everybody, they're not arguing what the governments are saying. It's just a lack of clarity. And maybe they need to in some areas where use your own intelligence because they can't define exactly what it is. But some people do need that definition. And we found that specifically in our area. And initially, the works on what was key worker status. And it's quite horrendous. I mean, we literally had hundreds, if not thousands, of texts and emails, telephones. What exactly does this mean? So when we published the government guidelines, one thing we made the point of is never to interpret those, because that's how you fall foul of these things when everybody has different interpretations of the same rules. So we issued the guidelines, and then went back ourselves to the government and saying, you need to clarify this. And one of the key ones, obviously, is key worker status. We push very hard for that to make sure that people going out to attend sites on maintenance even, not just emergency call-outs, but that drifts into other areas. You talk about still maintaining compliance to legislation. Dennis alluded to that earlier about changing the setup, and all of a sudden you're contravening your emergency exit sort of routes, etc., etc. It's the same situation when you sort of shut your door to somebody and say, you're not coming in, I don't care if you want to maintain our fire alarm systems or our extinguishers, you're not coming in. So immense amount of comments have come back to us as, well, what do we do? I said, well, you can't force the door down, you can't make people, you just have to make them aware that they are contravening. There is no latitude in the legislation that said it's okay if there's a pandemic, you don't have to have your systems maintained. There is no such thing, but there's practicality within that. So you have to try and push things back further down the line within certain reasons. But when does that certain reason finish? And this is really what we're trying to sort of work on at the moment, to make sure everybody's very, very clear in what they can do. And we also had people coming to us on furlough saying, well, I'll get a call out to fix a fire system, or an extinguisher's broken or been used and we need to replace it, or the gas system's gone off. But my guys are on furlough. If I bring them out for one day to go and fix it, then I've lost basically them again. I've got to go back into furlough for another 3 weeks. So is there any way we can do emergency call out during furlough, which is another piece of work we've been working on, all on the website, these sorts of things. So really clarity was the main thing, and working all the way down. You heard mention of the supply chain earlier. We had a letter from the Minister of State, James Brokenshire, directly to us saying, yes, if you are working in a factory, as long as you abide by the rules, which are very, very clear, and Dennis went through those very clearly, then you should be operating as a key supplier. And this was actually a direct letter. A lot of people have that letter and other letters we've put up on our website to take around with them if challenged. We've yet to see it. I think the police have been very practical about this. I think it's rather obvious when people are taking advantage of the rules. But I think they're also spotting people who are just trying to do the right thing, which we are trying to do as well. So influencing government decisions at this particular time of coronavirus is things like that, to make sure the key worker status is very clear. We've also talked about training while on furlough to the government. So we've been lobbying pretty hard to make sure that they're aware that they are dealing with an organisation that needs to be treated a little bit specially, same as others do in their own particular area. I've mentioned down there about liaising with other professional bodies. You're hearing them on the line now. Jonathan from FPA and Niall and Dennis, we all know each other very well. We talk in the same meetings. We exchange ideas. There is no confrontation from these bodies because, as always, we're just trying to do the right thing and try and focus within our remit as well. We all have specialists in our different areas, and that's what we've been doing to talk to those people. But these are also outside of this, even the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, to talk about cladding and various other companies, different organisations. So now, more than ever, we're integrating more and more into the whole wider world of fire safety. And we're also looking now at stuff to the best use of time in isolation. You know, we're putting messages out there like, yes, I know it's boring on furlough, and now you don't have an hour's travel there and an hour's travel back, and all this time we've gained, be that furlough or working from home, put it to use. Now is the time to be doing good things, and I'm always positive about these things. There is never, to me, even this situation, apart from the sadness of the deaths, of course, it makes you think again. And everything we're doing and looking at and changing, we're absolutely focused on making sure it's still useful post the lockdown. So we're not wasting our efforts of doing interim changes. So, for instance, online training, we will continue to do online training because it's useful in some areas. So although we've been pushed into that area, and Dennis alludes to innovation, you know, the necessity being the mother of invention, this innovation in so many areas is coming through because people have to and are being forced to. But that will be useful afterwards as well and makes us more efficient. So that's the sort of information flow that we've been coming out to our members and the public, whoever wants to read our information. So working conditions, internally we changed quite a bit. So our team, we have 50% on furlough of our team, and we've done like a buddy system so that one-on-one are dealing with that particular person's work. So a lot of integration before they went on furlough to make sure they have all the information, know who to deal with, all the registers of different files, etc., etc. And it's working well. It's never going to be perfect because they're basically doubling their load. We already were pretty busy, but it's like everybody else now. It's horrendously busy, but it's a situation we need to do. And we're finding through our 3 times a week team meetings, we have them in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Yes, the emotional state. Let's talk to people on furlough, those working extra hard. Let's make sure they're okay. And people, you know, we are a gregarious breed of human beings, and we need to speak to other people, engage with other people, and you get very, very easily isolated working from home just in front of the computer for 12 hours. So, you know, we're bringing everybody into where we are, what we're doing, making the furlough people feel part of what's going on so they're fully up to speed. So when we do bring them back, whether we feed them back in one by one or as a whole, not decided, they are fully aware of what's going on, who's doing what, and they hit the ground running. And it's also good for their mental state. They've not been isolated and forgotten about. They're very much an employee of the FIA, and we treat them as such. So although we don't ask them to do any work, obviously, and enjoy as best they can through the boredom, but maybe do some training, maybe raise your levels of knowledge in different areas because you're aware of what we're doing, so you know what areas to look at. So working conditions, again, advise on best practice. So I'm not going to go into that because I think Dennis covered that very well. And again, we're just using government guidance practices and not our guidance because we're not specialists. So HSE and governments have got that covered. We're also hosting meetings online for our members. Some of the smaller companies don't have the facilities to do this, the wherewithal. We do an awful lot of it. And somebody's moving my slides. Hang on.
I'll pop them back to for you, Ian. 1 second.
I can put it back, no problem.
Okay, I'll leave it for you.
Okay, I'm good there. Okay, so basically hosting meetings online. We were already doing WebEx type meetings anyway for our special interest groups to make sure people weren't traveling too much in our training room, so we're pretty efficient at it. But we also brought in a dedicated resource to train our trainers on how to do these meetings and the webinars and all the functionality that comes with them and the added security. We had to work pretty hard through people saying, a lot of the fire and rescue services, for instance, says we will not use Zoom because it's not secure. Quite rightly, like all software packages, they get better and better, and that is actually as secure as any, if not more so than even Microsoft Teams from what we're seeing at the moment. Because I was on one the other day on Teams and somebody started singing that wasn't even part of that group amongst the meeting, and that was a government set up meeting via their servers. So everything's hackable, but you just do the best you can do and be careful about sensitive information. So now the biggest change for us is we are a training organisation. We are an awarding organisation and a training organisation, separate departments within our company, and we changed to go online in the space of effectively 1 week, and that was unbelievably intensive, but we had to. There is no way people would travel. As soon as the lockdown was announced, we moved very, very swiftly into a position where we could offer seamlessly, online training. Now, I've seen some questions that popped up. You see them on the side of the screen here, and people were talking about online training. Is it good? Is it better? It's different. Some people prefer it because they're more relaxed and can take their own time. Some people don't like it as much. I personally don't. I like the human interaction. I like being able to ask questions on things. So it is different, and it is our only choice right now. So although people may complain about it, saying about online training and online exams, it's easy to turn around and say it will never be as good as classroom. Well, absolutely. There is no question of that. However, we have to, and we are. And in the future, as I mentioned earlier, it's future-proof for things like international training. And also the spread. We put a story on our website that showed 2 maps. So basically located everybody who came to a CPD. We had 60, 70 people, I can't remember exactly how many, come to a CPD in Hampton before the lockdown. And we logged where they all logged in from. So on a map we can bring up and see they're dotted. And they're usually within 50 miles, most are within 20 miles of Hampton to come in to do that course. And then we did a map of a CPD we did online about a month ago. I know from John O'Groats, Northern Ireland. We had 2 international ones, and we did a comparison that showed about what it actually meant to the people and the cost of, to the company, and of course the environment. And we come up with huge savings on our hours of travel. I mean, in that one classroom alone, there was about 20, 30 working days in travel alone taken up. There was several £1,000s worth of fuel costs. There was several £1,000s of those people's time travelling to and from, which are added to the list. We also looked at the environmental aspects of it and looked at the tons of CO2 that are emitted by people travelling to and from. So, you look at online, and is it the future? It's most certainly an option that we've got to use in the future, and there are very, very justifiable reasons to use it on that basis. The CPD thing has been very interesting. We realise that people are at home and they do have time, and we've engaged with them. We've had a whole load of these. We've actually reached the 1,000 mark on one of our CPDs, and we're trying to use industry experts. So it's not just the FIA staff. We're using people as specialists in different areas. We set it all up. We make sure CPD-wise it's in line with what should be done as CPDs to make sure there's no selling and people are getting generic information coming through. Because we operate pretty much as a sort of a guidance on CPD, what they should look like as industry experts in this particular area. So a lot of things are changing, and these are some of them. Okay. So looking on to financial implications. We've lost numbers on training courses initially because people said, okay, just pause them. Needless to say, people are spending their money where they can on their staff. So people often look at training as sort of coming in later, where let's do it at some later date. Let's do it when we're further down the line to see where we are. But Dennis mentioned this stuff to do with the competency steering groups. Qualifications, are almost going to be a necessity. They'll never be mandated, in my view, unfortunately, by government. They hate mandating things. To the reduction of red tape is the usual message, the reason why. But you look at gas safe and why we don't have fire safe, but I don't want to drift into that area because that's always been a common argument. But people are not going on traces. So we have to find ways, because we have people to pay. Although we're not for profit organisation, we still put our money into research projects when we can. We have staff to pay. We have websites to keep up and going. We have trainers. So we have bills. So we've got to find ways as a company. And you know, a lot of these postponements and cancellations are now coming back because the furlough system and the lockdown is drifting on and on. People are very aware now actually is the perfect time, and we're finding people in droves now coming back to thinking, okay, I'd rather wait till the classroom's ready, but you know what, let's just get on with this. It's as good as it gets. And a lot of people are telling us seriously that it is as good as being in the classroom because they've got a little bit more time. And we deliberately pace it out as well accordingly. So membership, of course, like all organisations, we survive on training fees and membership. And people are a little bit slower initially, but we've actually done an analysis on this, and we're actually ahead of where we were last year. People are paying their suppliers, and we are considered on their books to be a supplier because that's what it comes through to accounts. And people are aware that they have to keep their supply chain going. So we are the people who are supplying information, training, putting them in the right course, and we've been treated as such. And we're very, very pleased. But we've been talking to everybody. We've rung people. We've made sure they're okay, not chasing money, just saying, is everything okay? Where are you going? How can we help? We're looking at direct debits, spreading the cost over the year, all these different things, even putting back for some people who are just in a dire situation where they're completely closed up. We're basically just putting those guys on hold and moving that further back. We want to keep them as members. They've been loyal to us. We have over 900 members, so we've got a lot of work to do. We've got 2 staff ringing constantly people just to make sure they're all okay and how can we help. And all of that stuff is, on the bottom, comes down to it, is you think the trading association would be last on everybody's list, but we have to prove it. And we work really hard on what's in it for me scenario. We publish that on our website, and it explains to everybody what we are doing, how we're doing it, what resources they can tap into, what support they need, and how we're fighting for them. So that's where we are with that. Okay. And the final bit I want to talk about is internal adaptations to make sure we support. So I mentioned this before, we've spread the workload evenly, make sure everything is covered. We're not shut down anything. All of our councils are fully operational. All the people are meeting online. We have a new, luckily for us, just put it in before, state-of-the-art IT system, including telephones, voice over internet. So they're being directly transferred to the individuals, so it's pretty seamless. And we're pushing on. You know, Dennis alluded to it earlier. There are fire builds out there changing. There are changes to cladding. There are portals that are being put together. There's Brexit out there. Then I never thought I'd have to say Brexit again, but we are continuing to make sure that we're working hard with DIT and other people to make sure that Brexit is very much in their focus. The UK markings for equipment, about the new CE markings. You know, the government, they're going down various directions, and they're not aware of what they're actually setting us up for. So we are lobbying very, very hard on all things Brexit, Fireball, and we have working groups ongoing. And we operate in the region of about 100 working groups at one time, and lots of special interest groups for the government and for our members. And as I said, where we are, the internal adaptations, we are mentally preparing our staff, so hopefully you are as well, to re-enter. So we're talking to them, engaging with them, looking for the right time, and not just taking advantage of the fact there's furlough. Why don't we exploit it? The furlough has been a fantastic system in my view, and I think the government's, you know, you can complain at them in many, many areas, but this is one you can't. They've done a fantastic job with this. And I think many, many countries are very, very jealous of the way the government treats us on this furlough system, and it should bring us out the other side. But we are mentally preparing people. No promises. We can't tell them, guarantee them anything, but that's where we are. So hopefully, in conclusion, I'll say to you, don't waste the time if you're furloughed or working from home. There is enormous amounts of good you can do. And ensure investment into online centre is not wasted. Just absolutely everything you do setting things up right now, use them going forward in different areas. And as we said, this is the new normal. Change is inevitable. I'm now going to pass on to Niall from ASFP. Hope you picked up a few things. I think you know where I am. You can find me. Happy to take any questions later on. Over to you, Niall.
Good morning, and thank you for that, Ian, for that very interesting presentation. So I'm the CEO of the ASFP, and I'm going to talk about the impact of coronavirus on the construction industry and safe working. The ASFP is the Association for Specialist Fire Protection, and it's an association of manufacturers and installers of passive fire protection products such as doors and fire stopping and ducts and dampers and so on. We have approximately 250 members, mainly in the UK and Ireland, but quite a few across the world as well. Interesting to pick up on some of the points that Ian mentioned. In terms of training, we have an online training course, and that's still running, obviously, during this condition of the COVID-19 outbreak. But we're also developing our level 2 and level 3 certificates on passive fire protection. These are IFE, that's the Institution of Fire Engineer registered qualifications, and they're registered with Ofqual. Those are currently given by face-to-face training. Of course, that's all stopped for the time being. But we've got a platform, we've commissioned a platform which uses artificial intelligence, and our normal trainer who is actually come back absolutely full of enthusiasm for this, so that will be coming along soon. And also on this new way of working, because, you know, as Ian says, it is a lot of the things will go back the way they were before, but I think more won't. I think we've got new things, new ways of working. Certainly, we have 7 or 8 technical task groups to devise on the various documents on the various parts of passive fire protection. They're all meeting online. We've got members in Scotland, members in Northern Ireland who normally wouldn't attend, and of course they're coming along, so there's all that saving. And we don't think we're going to go back to having as many face-to-face meetings, maybe a much smaller proportion. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about fire developments or developments in fire, such as the Fire Safety Bill and the Building Safety Bill. They're covered in other forums, but I'm going to talk about the impact of the virus on the construction industry in terms of activity, safe working, supply chain, financial support. And if you go onto our website, we publish a regular, I'm not going to say daily because it's not, it's about 2 or 3 times a week, a coronavirus outbreak update, which distills and collates some of the information, because there is huge loss. So what I'm going to talk, I've also mentioned that the ASFP has a foot in both camps. That is, we're in the fire sector, and that all our products are related to fire. They're all there for fire safety, and all our contractors install fire safety products. But we also have a big foot, or another foot, as it were, in the construction sector. So, you know, we're obviously very well aware and very sensitive to what is happening in the building industry. Just bear with me a second. All right, so what has happened? Well, as you probably know, Dennis did mention it earlier, activity has fallen off a cliff, dramatic and unavoidable site closures. And you see there, that slide, the outputs lost due to shutdown in various sectors. Construction wasn't the worst, and of course, you've got wholesale and retailing is worse than then manufacturing. And of course, if you go for the hospitality industry, that's basically shut up shop for the time being. There's a slide showing the service business activity, and of course, the last bit where it falls off a cliff is the 2020 due to the COVID outbreak. But the point to note is, if you look at 08 and 09, there is a dip there, and that's the dip from the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And as you can see, we're well on the way to going a lot further than that. So that's going to be quite severe. In terms of activity, Now, these figures have been slightly updated. These slides were produced and delivered on Monday, and some changes have occurred since Monday, but I keep up with them every day. We've got here some figures for sites opened by region, and as you can see there, it's actually quite high. You're looking at about 60 to 75% of sites open now. In the updated figures that I have, these numbers haven't actually changed that much. They're similar. Some have gone up and some have gone down according to the accuracy of the survey, to be honest with you. But apart from Scotland, of course, where there's very little activity, there's quite a lot of quite a lot of activity. I mean, there's the talk in the papers, the national papers, of construction's going back to work. Well, I've news for you, construction never actually stopped, because the construction industry knew it would have to deal with this and work with this, and we couldn't just all sit at home and wait on furlough, waiting for the government to sort it out for us, because construction is an activity that has to be done on site. However, if you look at productivity, it's not such a good story. I mean, there you see there most sites are operating at about half the capacity. It's a bit better now since that slide was, I think that's 7th of May, that one. But sites are working at about half their productivity, and that, of course, is because of all the social distancing measures and the hospitality features and so on. And so finally, if you look at impact, the draft construction output scenario, you've got some quite big falls. Obviously, the biggest is private housing, and then less so in other sectors. It's because when the media talks about construction, they talk about housing, and housing is not all of construction. There's an awful lot of non-housing construction that goes on, and that has been leading the way and continuing more so, whereas most of the major house builders shut all their sites, or nearly all their sites. They're now coming back on stream. All right, so moving on to safe working. We're going to mention a few points here. Social distancing. I'm not going to tell you what social distancing is. You know that by now. The Construction Leadership Council, which is a group of the major construction associations and professional bodies, has produced site operating procedures. I'm going to go into those in a few minutes. And in terms of personal protective equipment and RPE, respiratory protective equipment, there's guidance on that. Individual trade associations are producing their own guidance, like, for example, for their particular trade. And the point that has been noted by Dame Judith Hackett, the construction industry we're told it can never change. It is a race to the bottom. It can't do anything. And she pointed out in the seminar she held, the construction industry has undertaken massive changes together in a very short period of time. And so it shows it can be done if the will is there. So moving on to the site operating procedures, and you see there it says revision 3 and revision 4 was published on Tuesday. So this is not quite correct, but it is 99% the same. In fact, there are only 2 clauses that have changed. So the construction, the basic premise is the wording in the italic, but it's not possible to follow the social distance guidelines in full in relation to activity. You should consider if that activity needs to continue and what mitigating actions you need to take. So there's guidance on when to work, how to travel to work in terms of private and public transport, social distancing, driving at work if you're driving machines or lorries at work, access and egress to sites, hospitality areas, a lot of work done there on toilets and canteens, and plans to avoid close working, etc. Moving on, all the guidance is developed on the Public Health England guidelines and the devolved equivalents in the devolved territories. The only changes that have occurred in Revision 4 is the reference to 2-metre separation, and 15 minutes has been removed, and reference is made into the latest government guidance to construction and outdoor working. So that's changed, but effectively it is a very good general guidance document to show how you can eliminate, reduce, isolate, and control. They're the stages you go through to make sure you can undertake safe working. Some more guidance there in terms of PPE and RPE. There's an organisation called the Finishes and Interior Sector, which is another trade association very similar to the ASFP, and they have guidance on face masks. There's actually not that much in the way of face masks, and as you know from the general media, there is quite a big divergence of opinion as to the value of them or not, and whether they are any good. So this document, this is about 4 pages, gives you some guidance as to which type you're going to use, if any. In the sectorial guidance, I did mention that at the beginning. So you have certain trade associations are producing sectorial guidance. There's one there for scaffolding. There's one there from the Building and Electrical Services Association. And we're in the process of developing some as and when we've completed, but it hasn't finished just yet. So the sectorial guidance, and there's also supply chain issues. Moving on to those. Well, of course, when the initial lockdown hit, there was major disruption and all the sites were shut. And in addition to that, the builders' merchants were shut as they were a non-essential activity. And of course, if the building, if the sites are shut, people don't need the products. That's another reason for the builders' merchants to shut. And then following the sites being shut and the builders' merchants being shut, manufacturing shut. So this kind of really ground things down to a halt very, very quickly. And certainly in conversations I had with the ASFP manufacturing members, most of them had shut factories, shut the majority of their factories. And within the 2 weeks, we said, we're up money again now because we've got this or we've been asked to do this. And they're now gradually, but desperate to work. So, of course, when the site started to open, well, you can get, we've started to open the site. We've imposed all the social distancing measures. We've got everything we need, but we haven't got the material that we need to work with. And so, there's supply chain issues, both in terms of general builders, merchants, materials, and other materials continue. So there is a link there, and that will be published at the end, which gives you a link to the Builders Merchants Federation and tells you what percentages of merchants are open, and more importantly, which merchants are open, so you can get the material you need. In terms of financial support, Ian mentioned the furloughing scheme. My goodness, there's a whole load of the system. There's, the bounce back liens, the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, statutory sick pay rebate scheme, a whole load of information there. And if you go to our website, they're all listed on our updates. Or you can also get them from Build UK, ASFP members of Build UK, and they have a list of all the financial information you can get there. I have actually some concerns over the furlough scheme. Ian's a fan of it. I'm a little bit more concerned that actually a lot of companies, maybe this is a construction thing, have used it just to pay workers' wages for a few months. In the meantime, some of them are still being asked to work when they shouldn't be asked to work. If you're furloughed, you cannot work. It should make that clear. Although you can undertake training, so just to make that's clear. And in some cases, I think it is putting off some of the inevitable, but maybe it will provide that respite until people, rather than saying, well, we need to make, e.g., half our workforce redundant, we can furlough them, and then in 3 or 4 months' time, well, actually, we only need to make 10% of our workforce redundant. Some companies, you heard yesterday on the news that Rolls-Royce have put in a fifth of their UK workforce are going to be made redundant. So we'll see. But there's a whole raft of financial support. At some point, of course, that will have to be paid for. So moving on to the long term, I showed you that slide earlier, which showed the collapse in income. And obviously that's going to change. There's some share prices of the house builders. I did mention the house builders, not the whole of construction, but they are a good proportion of it. And as you can see, they've had a good slide. And then when you look at this graph here, which comes from the Bank of England and the Office for budget responsibility. They predict this lovely V-shaped recession, but everything is fine Christmas and we can all carry on. If you look at the graph on the right, you've got the same V-shaped graph, and again, in the middle of that graph is the drop from the 2008-2009 recession caused by the financial crisis. And as you can see, that took quite a while to bring back up. And people say, well, that's different now because there's not a problem with money supply, but there's still a problem with confidence, and that's something that needs to be considered. Bear with me. So the Bank of England and forecast, we think they're very optimistic because the rise of unemployment, household spending will take time to recover. Even if people have got the money in their pockets and they might still have a job, they think, do I need to buy a new car now? Am I going to move now? And despite some government stimuli, which we talked about earlier, Construction Products Association, most optimistic forecast is a reduction of 10% of GDP, and it dropped in 6% in 2008, 2009. And that 10% is GDP, not construction GDP, or construction dropped about 15% in 2008, 2009. And so we're expecting a bigger hit there. They're also predicting that you won't see a return to normal until the year after next. Sorry to be the bearer of glad news. And if there's a second wave the year after that, and this is the Construction Products Association graph, an economy scenario, where you've got a more tick-shaped graph, which shows a much more gradual income. Now, return to normal. Now, of course, what we get is what will happen is what will happen. And all these forecasts have a habit of being wrong or right. And I think it possibly tends if you're a glass half full or a glass half empty person. I'm somewhere in the middle, to be honest with you. Certainly, the good side of it, I mean, Ian did mention that the new ways of working, that I think that's quite exciting. And some things will never change. There was a thing in the paper, as you probably recognise, thing in the paper that shows my age. There was an article recently. Warren Buffett sold all his shares in his airlines, and he's the Sage of Omaha, I think, as he's known. He's a multi-billionaire and had a very long and distinguished and correct sign of investing. So he's kind of saying basically airlines, you've had your time. On the other hand, people certainly from the desire to travel in terms of say holidays, I don't see that. That's not going to disappear. But I think a lot of business travel will never come back, I suspect. And you start thinking, do we actually need it? I think with this online meetings, maybe we don't. Okay, so there we are. That's it. So I've talked a bit about activity and site closures, safe working, the supply chain, financial support, and activities in the long term. And you've got a web link there. If you go to our website and look for coronavirus update, that will tell you the latest. Thank you very much. Now, I believe I hand over to Jonathan O'Neill of the FPA, who should be ready to take it away. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Niall, and it's always good going last in these presentations because so much that you would have said has been said before. As Ian pointed out, we work very, very closely with the FIA. I sit on the Fire Sector Federation executive with Niall, and I'm responsible for policy and strategy within the Fire Sector Federation as well. So very much of what Dennis had to say is echoed in what's happened to FBA and features in our response really to COVID-19. I think Ian also mentioned that the letter from James Brokenshire, which was incredibly helpful, albeit it arrived slightly later than the security industry. And I think that there was a real issue when this all first broke out about actually whether we, as an industry, we could continue to work. I think that the clarification that we got from James Brokenshire was incredibly helpful, and it was incredibly helpful for our customers because once we started to distribute that letter, actually we started to get work back again, which was really, really helpful. So I'm very, very grateful for all of the work that the FIA did with the Home Office and MHCLG. to facilitate that message and the letter going out. Of course, it's been important, and the message for us throughout this has been to maintain safety. I mean, we have seen in the past when we've had periods of buildings being unoccupied, we do start to see problems with the maintenance of fire protection systems and the issues that we get around crime with unoccupied buildings. And I think the response from the security industry and the fire industry has assisted greatly in ensuring that we haven't seen a big spike in arson, and we are beginning to see the buildings that are being put back awake again from being asleep for some time and being done quite safely. For us, I mean, the big change, I think it's been highlighted by other speakers, is going to be the change in the risk, and that's we again, it's been talked about by others. We're seeing a change in working practice. We're seeing new types of working. We're seeing changes in footfall, and I think it's quite right. You know, it'll take some time to recover to the level of activity that we had before. But the most important thing for us, and the big message that we've been trying to push out, is that you know it is important to continue your risk assessment. And to make sure that you know, you've got your business continuity plans, and as you all know, the FBA is very, very close to the insurance industry, and so it's been important for us to also ensure that people are continuing to have conversations with their insurers and their insurance brokers, particularly as the material risk changes. As we said, you know, it's important to keep your risk assessments up to date, and Niall and Dennis touched on the fact that we are seeing some big changes from government. The Fire Safety Bill has seen its second reading, and I think that, you know, we will start to see revised guidance emerging from government from how we'll be looking at risk in the changed world. I suppose I probably ought to close because we've got questions, but I think it's been important for us. I mean, I think Ian has said that training has changed dramatically. FBA is big in the training market. It's responsible for about 40% of our income. We weren't quite so quick to get it onto online training. We feel it's a very, very different product than face-to-face training, and we wanted to give that some thought. And we've now successfully run our second one-week training course, and we're managing to get online assessments done as well, which I'm very, very pleased about. But again, as far as FBA is concerned, we too are not for profit, and it's been important for us to get messages out there. So we've been running a series of webinars, and you know, I'd urge people to take part in those. We had our Fire Doors video webinar. We had 750 people in the morning and 750 people in the afternoon register for that. So clearly there is an appetite out there, whilst people have been working from home or have been furloughed. It's also been important for us to get information messages out there, and our board have made a very, very important strategic decision, in my view, is that about 95% of our publications will start to be given free when our new website refresh comes about, which will be on the 1st of July. So it's important for us that we ensure that messages are getting out there to people all of the time, that as risks emerge, that we're providing updated guidance and assistance for end users and for insurers. And so finally, I think it's just important for us to continue dialogue. I think, as I said right at the very, very start, we work very, very closely with Niall at the ASFP, with Ian at FIA, and particularly with Dennis at the Fire Sector Federation. And I think if we can take a united front with this and work together, play to our strengths, I think hopefully we can provide a better service for the industry in general. That's me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you there. Really, really good and really insightful from each of you. And I know how busy you guys are, so really appreciate you coming on today. Just quickly, before we begin with today's panel discussion, please also direct your attention to our webinar survey, which should be available on the right of the presentation window. If you close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in this survey will help us to improve similar webinars going forward. And now on to the panel discussion portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We have got a few questions already lined up for the panel that have already come in previously, so we'll start with those, but if we can get some more, we will do. And as I mentioned, if you have a question for a specific individual, please make this clear within the question. Right, guys, so we'll start, and I think a lot of you covered this in all of your presentations, but just to kind of go over it one more time in case people didn't hear. We noticed that many of you have expanded your online training offerings for professionals. Do you think this will continue even after COVID, and can it ever replace classroom training? Ian, if I come to you first, and then we'll move around.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, I kind of alluded to a little bit in the presentation, and part of the instruction to the team putting this together was make it useful for when we come out of lockdown. And I think the other guys have alluded to it as well, that things are changing. It is, I'll keep saying the same thing, but it's the new normal. There's no doubt about that. And a lot of these international longer term things will continue online. There's no doubt about that. But also internal meetings, you know, you start looking at how you deal with your day-to-day stuff, how you do your normal group meetings, council meetings, all these different things. But online training, it's good to have interface. You're also limited in the way what you can do in sort of holding a product or showing an object. Showing it in 2D is fine, but actually having it physically in your hand. So if somebody is explaining an extinguisher or a smoke detector or a panel, and also some of the courses we either do or will be doing, you know, you need a more practical side of things where you're actually physically installing something on a wall or on the ceiling. You can't do that virtually. You know, I'm sure in 20 years' time we could probably virtually do it, but right now the theory stuff is very good. So the design and understanding type courses, very much online, will continue in combination with classroom. And then you really need to just focus on the ones that you need to get your hands on things, so the more practical side of things. So if you split things down to, say, design, install, commission, service, you know, the design can be done from a classroom wholly, and there's no reason that can't be done online because it's theory-based. Whereas when you're talking about installing, you've got to physically do the work yourself. And when you're going to commission things, more often than not, there's a lot of information you need in theory, but you need to get your hands on things to see how it actually looks, because when you go on site, I absolutely guarantee you will never end up looking like it does in the manual. They'll look at something strange and again, how the hell did they do that? So that's my view.
Absolutely. And Niall, have you got anything to add to that? No, you might be on mute, so just double checking. Okay, we'll move to Dennis. Hello. Anyway. Dennis, would you like to? Oh, sorry.
Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah. Hello.
We can. No worries.
Yeah,
Go
sorry.
Ahead,
it's one of these things where you press the button and then the screen goes blank and you think I can't get it back on the phone. Right. Okay. Yes. Not much to add to what Ian just said. I agree about the practical side of it. It's very true in this case of courses we want to develop. They're practical courses that have to be done face to face. But it's not, I mentioned in my presentation all our technical task groups are all working online with a much larger participation from members who live further away for the travelling benefits. But it's also affecting the way we're working. I think I've had more conversations with the ASFP officers and with our council in the last 4 months than I've done in the previous 3 years in that we're all meeting by Teams and Zoom quite often. And the council that runs the ASFP used to meet every 3 months, and now it's meeting monthly, because we can have shorter meetings that are much more quick and easy, rather than something where everyone has to travel from all over the country for a day. So yeah, online is coming. It's not just training, but I think it's, Warren Buffett may have had something right selling his shares.
Absolutely. We can move on to another question here. There's been reports of an increased number of fires in the home during lockdown, with people obviously spending more time at home than ever before. How do we reduce these risks, even if people are having to self-isolate? Dennis, if I ask you first, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think fires in the home have always been an issue, and they do vary. They vary through the seasons, for example. And there was a period when home fires were particularly high, and one of the good things over the last 30, 40 years has been the fall away. I think all you can do is continue to press the messages about home fire safety, about the use of materials in the home. I'm talking flammable materials. People still do things, and they don't quite understand some of those risks. People are together more. So, in fact, observation should mean that they find a fire quicker, and they should follow the basic rules. The basic rule has always been get out, stay out, call us out. And I think those solid messages are good. But it is about being a little bit more careful around everyday things, particularly, it must be the same with accidents with young children, scalds and burns. When you've got a lot of people in a household doing all those sorts of things, you do need to pay a bit more attention to it. So I suppose what I'm saying, James, it's the publication and the pressing of continuous messages that we all know about being safe in the home. I think what's more of an interest to some people is outside the home, the commercial impact of a recession. And I was interested and pleased to hear Jonathan saying that there isn't an increase in commercial fires at the moment. I think that's something that we need to watch, particularly, as he was stressing, I think, as businesses return after a long lockdown. You can certainly have problems because systems haven't been maintained, and something might have gone wrong, and therefore you don't detect it.
Absolutely. Okay. And Jonathan, did you want to add to that at all?
No, Dennis is quite right. This is a function of community safety. When we see fire and rescue services concentrating, able to concentrate on community fire safety, we've seen big drops in fires in the home, and inevitably, as people spend more time in the home, the risk pattern shifts, and we would expect to see more fires in the home. My big concern, and this is connected with the downturn in business, which we're all predicting now, it would be the rise in arson fires. We've got a long summer ahead of us. Many kids won't have gone back to school, won't have had school probably for about 4 months by the time we get through to August. And I am concerned that we'll see an increase in fire setting, juvenile fire setting in particular. It's a really difficult nut to crack, but I think that it's something which we need to be aware of, and ministers and fire and rescue service need to be aware of, because I think we could be in big danger later on in the summer if we're not careful.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, totally agree. And sort of following on from that, really, I'll come back to Ian again. How do you feel the sector can communicate best practice for obviously both professionals, but also for consumers? Is there a catch-all solution, or do you think it's via a mixture of avenues? And how important do you think digital methods are, such as websites and stuff, compared to, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, this is stuff we discuss in innovation sort of forums about these types of things, and we all talk about paperless societies. And my last company, we pushed, even as a manufacturing company, to produce about 15,000 power supplies a month. Let's try and make ourselves paperless. That was the target, and we nearly got there. There'll all be some small bits, but it's just habits that need changing. And paper, I think we all like to print things off and read them on occasions. It's a terrible way of doing things. Other people walk around with an iPad strapped to their hand, and they basically use that for all their documents. So don't print off agendas and don't print off items for discussion. They're all there on the screen. So as a society, we're moving that way. And I think if you look at digital methods of even information on our sites, there's a big push towards BIM. It seems to have gone very, very quiet, by the way, and everybody's talking about it's imminently going to happen, which is building information. Was it materials? I think. So basically, you're looking at storing everything about everything digitally. Now, that is very, very useful. You can send stuff in advance. We were discussing the other day about premises information boxes, held in buildings. And inside there, you'll have various paper documents that are useful for fire and rescue services to help them fight fires and evacuate people, etc. Why aren't they digital? There's no reason why not. I look at fire logs in panels, and I know from my early days going to a panel, it's funny enough, there's an incident that the last 4 registers in there for checking the fire alarm system, all in the same ink and probably still wet. So audit trails, very important. There's many ways of doing it. Risk assessments, sharing information. I think everything's moving digitally, and it is a direct improvement. There is nothing negative about it. The only negative I can see about using paper and not using digital for everything is the fact people like to physically hold something. And people relate to having a book lying on a sunbed on the beach somewhere. Looking forward to those days, of course, like everybody else, but some people just like to do that and not hold an iPad reading off that. So, and a newspaper. Dennis is a newspaper man. He'll buy a newspaper and read it where other people want to read it online. So they will fade out. They will disappear because there will not be that need. But yeah, digital for virtually everything to do with business, products, auditing trails, absolutely the way to go.
Great. Thanks for that, Ian. We've had a few questions come in actually regarding visiting homes or visiting offices and how you can carry out inspections whilst maintaining 2-meter distances, obviously, and also what kind of face coverings to wear. I don't know, Niall, have you got any sort of thoughts on that one?
In terms of visiting offices, etc. Well, at the moment you're practicing social distancing, and it's up to the provider of the office, the site, or the premises to ensure that social distancing is maintained. We're looking to restart some of our face-to-face training because we know that some trade associations are beginning to start face-to-face training with social distancing. So, you have to don't just turn up and expect them to welcome you with open arms. Pardon the pun about using open arms because they're not supposed to touch. You need to say, can I come and visit, and what have you got in place? So a lot of companies are producing risk assessments for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a difficult one, I think, for the fire sector in terms of maintaining that 2-meter distance, particularly in accessing homes to carry out assessments. Dennis, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because as the lockdown has actually moved forward, and carrying out a risk assessment, carrying out maintenance, and all those sorts of things within a lockdown building is an ideal time to do it. In one sense, there's probably only the security guards to deal with, and in you go, and you've got a free run. The difficulty, you say, arises when you're dealing with something like a care setting, and you're trying to work with people, and the PPE arrangements that exist for that home have to be followed. But I think part of this also links back to what we were saying earlier about the technology. You can move online with your training and with your information and how you do things, but practically some things have to be done. And a practical example for me would be fire drills. Now, what do you expect to do during a fire drill scenario at the moment? The big issue in one sense about a fire drill is that you're actually conducting familiarity as well as usability of the routes. So you're making sure that external staircase is actually available, that somebody hasn't a plant in the last 13 weeks, has grown outside an exit door that virtually means that you can't use the exit door. So part of it is about using technology, certainly, and you can do the training, you can do a lot of awareness and all the rest of it. It's like watching YouTube when you're trying to do a repair at home, You can watch it, but there's a point at which practical ingestion has to occur. You have to go out there and you have to physically do it. And the issue there for me is the PPE. I mean, for example, on a fire drill I mentioned, you've got to keep your 2 metre distance. In one sense, the fire drill isn't about the time of movement, how long it takes to get out of the building, assemble it, apply. It is about going through the steps to make sure, as I say, practically you can use it. And online, it's about learning and understanding what it's about, why you're doing it, and all those sorts of things. So I think it's a mix, is what I'm trying to say. And as we gain in experience, and we all are gaining in experience, I think we're getting better and slicker. And as Niall is saying, at one level, you don't travel to meetings because you don't need to. You get better attendance at the virtual meeting, in fact, and people are more productive because they're not locked up in travel time. So at one level, it's good, but in another, there are occasions when you will need to meet face-to-face and you will need to do certain things. So that's really how I look at this, the learning outcome. And it's what Ian was saying. There's no loss in this. We are learning, and we're learning to do our business differently and better in some senses.
Yes, yeah, no, totally agree. And I think in not just the fire sector, but across the board, everybody's going to have to learn to do things a little bit differently. Certainly for the short term, but I think it will move on and become, as many have sort of said, the new norm. One for you here, Jonathan. Actually, there was an interesting comment about the levels of arson at the moment. Does the panel, I'll point this towards you, John, think that as the COVID-19 situation goes on in time, this may become more prevalent? In particular in terms of empty buildings and the foretold recession effects?
Well, history would tell us yes, it does. We've seen it time and time again, a downturn in economic activity, a season increase in arson. I mean, there is really good guidance now about arson prevention and about how to look after unoccupied buildings. And I think that being arson aware and putting in sensible arson prevention techniques, improving security, making sure you've got CCTV and all the rest of it, will assist greatly in reducing the prevalence of arson if we do see an increase or a spike later on in the summer. But I think it's something that because we are aware of it, hopefully we police, fire and rescue services, and those who are undertaking risk assessments, we should be able to reduce the worst effects of arson and make sure that good commercial buildings aren't lost, that good commercial businesses aren't lost, and the fire and rescue service don't end up having to endanger themselves in putting out fires which have been deliberately set.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you, Jonathan. One comment here. On the subject of fires in the home and home working, I'm interested to hear about the differences in regulations between office furniture and home furniture that employees should be aware of if providing staff with furniture to enable them to work from home. I don't know, Ian, have you got anything to say to that one? Is there any regulations you're aware of?
No, to be honest, I'm going to shove this to Niall, who's in a better place to answer that than I am.
Sounds good. Niall?
I'll have. I'm digging back in my old testing knowledge, but certainly the upholstered furniture regulations are the other regulations that are pertinent. I'm not quite sure whether there's a separation between office furniture and domestic furniture. It's just upholstered furniture supplied for sale, where there's a number of tests, etc. Upholstered furniture used to be a major source of fires, which is why the upholstered furniture regulations were brought in many years ago. The UK leads Europe, and that we're far ahead of them. I'm not aware of any guidance on this or in terms of companies offering or providing furniture for their staff that either meets office requirements or home requirements. I would have thought most companies would just tell the staff to buy suitable furniture, and therefore you can only buy what you can buy.
Yeah, I think you're right,
Okay.
Niall, if I can just assist you with that. I think the furniture regs are the applicable regs, and they are universal. It's an interesting point that if the furniture regs come in a few years ago, they wouldn't have gone through the European process. So we wouldn't have been able to have them. It was the fact that they were introduced before the control of European standards on furniture. So UK, James, is unique. in having control over upholstered furniture?
To add to that, Dennis, the European Commission did actually try to introduce an upholstered furniture directive, a bit like a construction products directive, but the European industry squashed it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that's answered your question there. And one, I'll point towards you, Ian, for this one. Can you confirm if fire risk assessors are classed as essential or key workers?
Well, my immediate answer is yes, but it also depends on what it's being done for. And again, this is practicality. I'm trying not to do a government answer on this by being woolly, but some are a necessity right now, and some are for a long-standing project that's ongoing, and there's no particular rush. So it's needs as needs must. But as far as I would say is that I would consider them to be key workers, but only when it's a necessity to do. Now, how many things are you going to pick up as a fire risk assessor to make a building safer? To me, that is actually a key activity, but that's not what the government's saying.
I think it's probably worth.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Probably worth making. Yeah, it's probably worth making the point that there is a difference between key worker and essential worker. I mean, a key worker was essentially brought in at this crisis to ensure that the children of key workers had access to education. The essential worker is something quite different, and I think that the clarification that we got from James Brokenshire was quite clearly that fire safety and fire safety maintenance is essential and it does need to be carried on. But I don't think we would fall into the key worker category insofar as, suddenly there is a place at schools which are closed for all other workers, suddenly for the children of people in the fire safety industry. Suddenly.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll finish on the final question. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and thank you to everyone who's asked questions. There's a lot that's come in. We'll see if we can get some sent across to the speakers. But as all the speakers have said, I'm sure everyone has got their details. In the resources page, there is a link to all of the speakers' respective websites. So feel free to ask any additional questions that didn't get asked on here to there. Final question then. How would you quantify the fire risk in blocks of flats during this time, i.e. increased occupancy? Is there a need to inspect and assess more rigorously? And if we go to Dennis for that one first.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in one sense, but what's the increase in occupancy? Presumably at night when everybody's at their lowest, which is i.e. less alert, sleeping, the occupancy is as high as it will ever be, and therefore the argument has got to be that the building should be safe for whichever condition it happens to be in. So full occupancy, i.e. 2 o'clock in the morning, generally, when everybody is not alert, is exactly the same as being there in the day. If the questioner is thinking more about people doing things, i.e. what they're doing in these flats, that's quite complex in the sense that the controls over what you do in your private dwelling become quite difficult, and a law like the Housing Act and so on is in place to try and allow certainly social landlords and private landlords access to control what might be regarded as poor practices. Where we've seen problems, they have generally been people acting inappropriately, and I mean, the classic early on was people having barbecues on balconies or something like that, which was never the intention of both the person who constructed and the person who presumably rents out the premises. So I think my answer to this is to say it should be safe and should be running as a safe building anyway. But if people have got genuine concerns that the increased activity in the building is introducing new levels of risk, you're back to where we were speaking just about risk assessment. We're back to having someone just check those buildings. And if that does show that you do need a more regular visit, then you should undertake more regular visits. I mean, that's the part of the risk inspection process. And as you know, Coast Grenville, some buildings, high-rise particularly, have had to have wakeful 24-hour watches put in them because of the risk whilst the cabin is replaced and so on. So there are methods and there are approaches, but it does depend on an assessment of the risk, not just the occupancy level.
Sure. Great. Thank you for that answer, Dennis. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. But as I want to say again, thank you so much for you, the speakers. You great presentations and really insightful answers to the questions. So thank you, Dennis, Ian, Niall, and Jonathan. And thank you to everyone in the audience for your attendance and participation this morning. And we hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did. And also a big thank you to Baldwin Boxall, our sponsors for today. Within the next 24 hours, you should receive a personalised follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues who may not have been able to listen to this event, as they can still register to listen even after this week. And be sure to head over to our Digital Week homepage, which you can find a link for in the resources section, which is full of feature articles and exclusive downloads related to the fire safety sector. You can also follow all the latest by searching the hashtag FIREX Digital on social media. From this page, you'll also find a link to sign up to this afternoon's webinar, where we'll be covering life after Grenfell, what's next for tall buildings and regulation. It's sure to be a fascinating discussion, with Colin Todd representing the FIA and Andrew Taylor from the ASFP both set to speak. Tomorrow, we've got key speakers from the facilities management sector too, so please head over to shponline.co.uk to find out more about that. On there, you'll have access to a fantastic session held on Monday morning discussing the future of the health and safety industry and the questions surrounding PPE sourcing, some of which we covered today as well. And don't forget to follow IFSEC Global on social media to keep up to date with all the latest this digital week and in the industry. That's all from us for now. Thanks for your time and to the speakers. Have a great day and keep safe, everyone.